Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Anniken. I design knitting patterns, I teach knitting workshops online and in person, and I sell yarn through my website YarnAddict.co.uk. You can find all my social media links, how to sign up to my newsletter, links to my online courses, where I'm teaching in person, my patterns, all that kind of stuff below this video, and also my website YarnAddict.co.uk. Welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to talk about sharing patterns. I used to write a blog. I used to blog quite a lot, but I haven't for several years now. But I was just going through brainstorming some different ideas for new videos, and I realized that there are some blog posts, old blog posts, that actually have some quite useful information in them that I've decided to turn into video format. So this is a blog post that was called Sharing Patterns, and it was as a response to a particular incident that I witnessed. And if you want to read the blog post instead of watching this video, or after watching this video, I will pop the link to the original blog post below as well. I think a lot of pattern sharing comes from ignorance and not really knowing what's allowed. But I think also some pattern sharing happens because of just deliberate meanness, or just deliberately people know it's wrong but they still do it. In the past, most designers used to work for yarn companies. I'm talking like a few decades ago now, and patterns were mainly a way of selling the yarns. A yarn company would employ designers who would design patterns for them, and at least in Norway where I grew up, you could usually, if you wanted to buy a pattern, you had to buy the yarn to go with it. The patterns were really just a way of selling the yarn. When I first moved here, I used to go back to Norway and I wanted to buy a pattern booklet in my mum's local yarn shop. And I used to have to buy the yarn for at least one sweater, otherwise they wouldn't sell me the pattern booklet, which really used to annoy me because sweaters worth of yarn took up a lot of space in my suitcase. And I'm sure there were similar rules here in the UK and in other parts of the world. These rules probably did encourage copying of patterns, especially if you had to buy a pattern booklet. So, you know, if I bought a pattern booklet, for example, but I only wanted to knit one sweater, I talked to a friend or my mum or something who wanted to knit another sweater, I might just give her a photocopy. I'm sure I've done that in the past before I knew better, and I'm sure that happened quite a lot. Now, there are a couple of different things. First, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal expert, and I think rules on copyright vary from country to country. So nothing I share in this video is to be considered legal advice. A lot of it is just kind of what I think is ethical and best practice. Back in the days when most designers used to work for yarn companies, if you bought a pattern booklet or a single pattern and you then shared it with somebody else, the designers still got paid because they would probably be on a salaried kind of job. These days, most designers are freelance. So most designers make a living from designing and selling their patterns. Even yarn companies usually who employ designers usually employ them on a freelance basis. From what I understand, I think even companies like Rowan, from what I understand, I think most of their designers, if not all their designers, are now freelance. So if I don't sell my patterns, I don't get paid. If I design for yarn companies and magazines, I get paid for the job. So I get paid per design. If I design for my own pattern line, then I get paid based on how many copies I sell. I still think that it's a bad thing. So if you buy a pattern from a yarn company and you think, well, the designer's been paid, they get paid for designing that pattern. They've been paid a set fee for that. If I copy it and give it to a couple of friends in a knitting group, it's not going to harm them. Well, I think it does, because the number of copies of patterns that yarn companies sell may help them, may influence their decision on whether or not to use that designer in the future. If that designer's pattern is actually quite popular, a lot of people are knitting it, but not that many people are buying it, then they may not offer that designer any work in the future. Because instead of buying the pattern, people have just been giving it away and sharing it with their friends for free. Since the internet happened, and especially since Ravelry, and there are now other ways of selling your patterns online as well. I mean, there were ways of selling your patterns online before Ravelry, but it was a bit more difficult. Things became a lot easier for knitwear designers after Ravelry, and there are now obviously other websites that you can sell your patterns as well. I sell my patterns through Payhip. I also do have a few patterns on Love Crafts. I uploaded them when they first started allowing designers to sell their patterns. I haven't uploaded a new pattern to Lovecrafts for a long time because I used to find their whole upload process a bit tedious. And so new patterns now get uploaded to Ravelry and to PayHip, and that's it. It's an easier way to get started as a designer because rather than waiting for a magazine or a yarn company to commission you, you can just design something, upload the pattern and sell it. But it has also made it more difficult for designers, I think. For some self-published designers, designing might be a part-time job. For some people, it may be a way to fund their hobby. For some people upload their patterns, especially to Ravelry, are just hobby knitters who decide to write a pattern and share it freely, and that's fine. But for a lot of people, it's their full-time income. And even if it's a part-time income or a hobby income, it's still an income. And if you do the work and you produce a professional pattern, you deserve to be paid for that, whatever your situation. I know a lot of people say that most designers who do it full-time have a spouse or a partner that supports them financially, and that might be the case for a lot of people, but it's not the case for everyone. A lot of people need to make money from those patterns in order to feed themselves and their families. And for some people, it's their only income for their family. So don't just assume that everyone is in a position where they have other people who can support them and that the income from that doesn't really matter, because you don't know people's circumstances. And regardless of their circumstances, if somebody produces a professional pattern and charges for it, they deserve to be paid for that. When I first started designing patterns, most people were charging £3 for a pattern on Ravelry. These days, my patterns went up to £4, and now I'm trying to put them up to £4.50 or £5. I really like them all by the beginning of next year, so by the beginning of 2024, to be £5. That's really what I would like to sell my patterns for. I have been designing patterns now for 15, 16, 17 years. I started designing patterns before Ravelry came on the scene, and I started selling my patterns on Ravelry while they were still in kind of beta testing. I joined fairly early on and started selling my patterns as soon as that was an option, and I was charging £3 for my patterns. Now most of my patterns are my new patterns are £4.50 or £5. My older patterns, a lot of them are still £4 because I haven't had time to update them yet. So I'm filming this in April 2023. So that means that in the last 15, 16, 17 years, my patterns have gone up by £1, £1.50 or £2. That is not a lot per pattern. And my pattern writing skills have improved a lot in that time. I think my patterns are much better now than when I started writing patterns. When I first started publishing patterns, I didn't even get them tech edited because I didn't know what a tech editor was, although you should have somebody check your patterns. Those patterns are no longer for sale, and the ones that are have been updated since and improved since. And that is also why a lot of my older patterns are no longer available for sale, because they are in an old format and I don't think they're as good as my current pattern, and I haven't had time to go back and update them. So when you think about it, even if I was charging £5 for my patterns, I don't think that's a lot of money for a pattern. Sewing patterns cost a lot more than that, a lot more. Even PDF sewing patterns usually cost a lot more than that, I've been told. I actually bought a PDF sewing pattern for a while, but I've been told they cost a lot more. So I think knitting patterns and crochet patterns are quite cheap. But there are still a lot of people who feel like they shouldn't have to pay for a pattern. Patterns should be free. As I said, I'm not going to give legal advice because I'm not a lawyer, but what I'm going to say is kind of my interpretation of what is ethically acceptable. So when you purchase a pattern, it is for your use. If I purchase a pattern or buy a book or a magazine, I can knit something from it, then I can give it to somebody else. If I finish with something, I can give it to somebody else. I can give that one copy that I have. For example, I have a magazine on my desk. If I finish reading this knitting magazine and my neighbour across the road likes knitting and I finish with this, I can give this to her and she can knit what she wants from it. And then when she's finished with it, she can give it to somebody else. What I can't do is I can't go in this pattern and photocopy a pattern and give it to my friend. That's not acceptable. I can give her the whole magazine, or the whole pattern, but I can't photocopy it. And if I bought a pattern online, I can't print off multiple copies and give them around to all my friends. And this used to really annoy me when I used to go to my local knitting group. And I know this still happens because I saw, we have a WhatsApp group, and I saw a comment in the WhatsApp group just recently. I remember once I came into knitting group, and one of the ladies said, "That pattern you're knitting," to somebody else, "can I have a copy of it? Can I go downstairs and just get a photocopy of it?" And she said yes. And I was a bit bristling, but I didn't say anything. And then somebody said to me later on, "Oh, such and such a pattern that you designed, I bought a copy of it and knitted it, and my friend really likes it and asked me if she could have the pattern. So I told her I would ask you if you could bring another copy in and I'll pay for it, because I didn't want to photocopy my copy because it's you." But that same person on the same day lent one of her other patterns to somebody else in the knitting group, and they went downstairs to the office and photocopied it. So the fact that she knew me made her not want to photocopy my patterns and give it to a friend, but she had no problems doing that to another designer who wasn't me. And that really bugs me, to be quite honest. But I think that happens a lot in knitting groups up and down the country, both here in the UK and all over the world. So it's not acceptable to buy a pattern, a book, a magazine, and then photocopy it and share it with your friends, and buy a PDF pattern and then email it to everyone at your knitting group. You can print off and photocopy that pattern for your own personal use as many times as you want to. So if you buy one of my PDF patterns, you can save that on your computer and then print it off every time you want to knit it. That's fine. Don't have a problem with that. You buy my book, you want to photocopy one of the patterns to knit from it, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. If somebody comes to me and says, "I knitted a pattern from your book," I didn't buy the book because there was only one pattern I wanted, but my friend had your book, so she photocopied it for me and gave it to me. That would really annoy me. If you lend your book to a friend and she knits it and then she gives the book back to you, that's different, because you can't both be knitting from that same copy at the same time. So I think that is a little bit different than photocopying something. So you both basically have a copy of the same pattern at the same time. I used to go to a machine knitting group, and one of the ladies that I started my local knitting group with was a very keen machine knitter. And I remember her talking about the declining machine knitting in the UK. And she said that she felt like part of that was because machine knitters would copy patterns and share them around knitting groups or share them around their machine knitting friends. And as a result, machine knitting designers were not making a living, and they had to find other ways of making a living. And if you design patterns for knitting machines, you can easily pivot into commercial knitwear design. So a lot of designers who design for machine knitting also design garments, so they sell directly to retailers, to high street shops, for example. I know a couple of people who used to do that. And I haven't done machine knitting for a while, so I've not really been in the machine knitting community in this country for a while. But at the time when I was machine knitting, there is modern, trying to find modern machine knitting pattern in this country, and I'm talking probably 10 years ago, was extremely difficult. There was a machine knitting magazine that felt very dated. A lot of the patterns I would find just felt very dated. And what I saw people machine knitting looked very dated. And I think that is because people weren't supporting designers and buying their patterns, so they were finding other jobs. And that will happen to hand knitting as well. I know people who used to design knitting patterns who have now given up and now do other things. A lot of knitting designers will supplement their income by doing other things like teaching or selling the yarn or having an online shop or consultancy work or writing or other things. I do think people are also giving up because they can't make a living selling patterns. I don't think the hand knitting community are going to run out of patterns, because there's always new designers coming along, younger designers coming along. But if people try to make a living in this community and they can't, they will eventually have to go somewhere else and do something else, because most of us need money to live on. At some point you've got to make money. When I publish a pattern, it costs me a lot of money to publish a pattern. I spend hours writing the pattern. I or my sample knitters spend hours knitting the sample. So I either knit it myself, and obviously my time is worth something, it takes hours, or I pay a sample knitter to knit a sample for me. I used to pay my daughters to model for me, and I actually model most of it myself, so I don't pay myself to model for me. And my husband takes the photographs, and I'm not paying him. I would love to pay a professional photographer and models, but I can't afford that. I pay a tech editor to edit the patterns and check it for accuracy and things like that. And I have desktop publishing software that I use to write my patterns in. I have a charting software that I use. Both of those, when I first got them, I had to pay for them. And if I have to update them, I sometimes have to pay for that. This all adds up, and it costs a lot of money. And when you split that out over a number of patterns, it costs a lot of money. So before I've even made enough money to pay myself, I have to pay all these other people first. And that is why we charge for patterns. Even if publishing knitting patterns or designing knitting patterns is a hobby for some people, there are still plenty of people who do it professionally. And even for those who it is a hobby, if they put the right amount of effort and they're paying people to tech edit and all these things, they still deserve to be paid. And so if you enjoy knitting patterns by independent designers, pay for it. Next time somebody asks you for a photocopy of a pattern you're knitting, or ask you to email them a copy of a pattern you're knitting, encourage them to buy their own copy. Say, I'm sorry, no, I can't do that, because it'd be breaking, I think it's probably illegal in most countries to do that. Just say, sorry, I can't do that because that's illegal, or that's not ethical, whatever. But I can tell you where you can buy a copy. I'll send you a link, or the designer is called so and so. You can find her patterns on Ravelry or Payhip, or her website is, or her social media is, whatever. Tell them where to find the pattern and encourage them to buy their own copy. That way designers will make money and can continue to design fabulous patterns. Help us educate knitters to appreciate and be willing to pay for the work that goes into designing knitting patterns. The whole knitting community will be a lot better off in the long run if we all do that. So I hope I've given you something to think about. If you have shared patterns in the past, that's fine. We probably all have done that. If you didn't know any better, that's fine. Now you do know better. We do the best we can with the information we have at the time, I think. So if you've done that in the past because you didn't know any better, that's fine. Don't beat yourself up about it. But if you've done it in the past but you did know better, then please don't do it again. And help us educate others. If people ask you for a copy, don't. Just tell them where they can get it from. So I hope that my thoughts on sharing patterns was useful, that you learned something and that it made you think. Obviously for me as a knitting designer, it's something that's very personal, and if I know that my patterns are being photocopied and passed around, then I lose money. I have had times when I've been doing a show where I've had two friends come to my stall together, and they've been talking about what patterns they want to get, and one's got one pattern, the other one's picked up another pattern, and they'll say, you get that one, I'll get this one, and then we'll swap. And it always makes me go a little bit, just buy one each. If they literally swap patterns, or one person knits it and the other person knits the other one, then they swap it, that's fine. If they go home and photocopy it, so they both have both copies, then that's not good. I don't tend to actually challenge people at an in-person event like that, because people are customers and I don't want to be rude to people. If people ask me, I will tell them how I feel about it. If somebody tries to take a picture, because obviously now we're all carrying smartphones, so if somebody picks up my pattern and then tries to photograph it, I would definitely say something. But yes, do let me know what you think on this matter. What have you done in the past? What do you do now? Do you challenge people who share patterns? Do you hear people talking about sharing patterns in knitting groups and things you go to, online groups you belong to? One thing which I haven't mentioned, which is rife, is I think, from my understanding, it's mostly Russian and Chinese websites. I'm not picking on Russia and China, but that's what I've been told. Every so often I will get a message from somebody saying that I've seen one of your patterns on this Russian website or whatever. I don't speak Russian. I can't even verify that it's Russian necessarily. or another similar language. It used to really upset me. Now I just think, well, people who download that pattern aren't going to be my customers anyway. If you find patterns on websites where you're not sure, then you can always contact the designer and say, do you normally sell on this website? If I buy this pattern, am I buying it from you? One thing I haven't mentioned is Etsy. So I've had a problem in the past with people who bought a knitting magazine. They have gone through it and they've torn out or cut out all the individual patterns, and then they've put them in a plastic pocket, and then they've listed them on Etsy or eBay and sold them. That's not illegal, because the first time it happened, I actually contacted the magazine and their legal department got onto it. But if somebody buys a magazine or a book and rips out all the pages and sells each pattern individually, that's not illegal. If they photocopy it and sell it, then that's illegal. Like if I buy loads of patterns and I no longer want them, or loads of books, magazines, I no longer want them, and I sell them, that's not illegal. But if I start taking photocopies of them and sell them, that is illegal. So at least that's my understanding of it. But as I said, I'm not a lawyer. So let me know what you think. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. I will see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.